All right,
And
are we
we're back.
Oh, yeah.
We
All
back.
Okay.
That was a nice commercial break.
Yeah.
But no, coming back to it, so we were talking about your first experience, and you were very, very young.
Very young. So many of my experiences, again, this is all in my crib. And by that I mean in the traditional use of the term, not in the contemporary vernacular. I mean, technically, I guess both are true.
Yeah.
I was in my crib, you know.
Yeah.
But I was also in my crib. But like I said, I've been having these experiences off and on. And they were very challenging as a small child because I didn't know what was going on.
Sure.
You're already dealing with the fact that you're a little kid and things can freak you out. And then you are conscious of the room, but you can't move. And sometimes can't breathe and other things. It's good times. Anyway, so I finally, when I was, like I said, about 2.5, I came into that state, but for whatever reason, because usually what happens is you panic. There's a panic because you're trying to, the conclusion I've come to, and I'm sure there are psychologists that would disagree with me. I'm sure of it, actually. But my feeling is that what happens when you come into that state is that you're actually not in your physical body.
Okay.
You're actually in an astral state when you're in that, but you're still laying in your body. But what happens is you're trying, because you're in your body, like laying there, you're trying to make your body function. And your body's actually asleep, but you're not. And so what happens is you start to panic because you can't move. Well, you can't move because you're trying to make your brain operate your body. It's all about thought. It's not about physicality. Mm-hmm. So for some reason, in that particular time, I guess became aware that I was not in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And
it became a form of astral projection or
Absolutely.
like spirit walking in the sense, right?
And I just suddenly was standing in the middle of my bedroom.
Now, when you were saying you're standing in the middle of your bedroom, were you standing in the middle of your bedroom as a 2-year-old?
Yes.
You were 2.
Yeah.
You
Well, about 2.5.
2.5. Okay.
So if you can imagine, I was about 3 feet tall, if that. And well, before I should tell a little bit about structure. So if you can imagine, this is a second story, like over a garage, kind of old-fashioned house, probably built in the 20s, based on certain things that I noticed. And there was another one right next to it to the north. So there was like those old little tiny sidewalks that would go between, and my bedroom looked out at the wall of the building across, right? And so I'm standing there, which is weird because I'm sort of a little disoriented, but I'm standing looking out the window, and there are these two. I've always described them as children floating outside the window. They're floating in the air, and there's enough ambient light outside that I can see them. It's night, but it's like not night. It's like pre-dawn, so they're floating outside the window. And I think the reason I always describe them as children is that they. You know how adults, okay, you all remember when you were 2, right?
Vividly.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but there's a thing about adults. They have a seriousness about them, and they have, you can tell that they're thinking about a lot of things, other things. Children tend to be doing what they're doing at the time. They tend to be more in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I always describe these beings as children. They weren't children, but they felt more childlike than adult-like. But they were like adults if they weren't uptight.
Yeah.
They're present. They're very present.
More wonder about them.
Yeah, exactly. And they were sort of they were bigger than me, and they had no body hair on them at all, like nothing like that. They were anthropomorphic, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they were humanoid. But they were very smooth, almost like...
So, I mean, not me, but for these guys, can you describe what anthropomorphic means? I totally get it, but go.
Anthropomorphic, anthrop means basically human. Anthropomorphic, morph, shape. So they were human-like, but they were not human. And they kind of had a texture to their skin like silly putty, like that sort of, like they weren't malleable like silly putty, but they had a little sheen and they were sort of not pink, but they were pinkish.
Maybe you're sweating.
Sweaty Gumby.
Sweaty Gumby.
Did they?
I think that should be a thing.
What?
Oh, you said like a pink though? Like
So
their
it was
color?
yeah, it was pink.
Yeah, they were like almost like the color of an eraser on a number 2 pencil. That color, but not maybe not quite that magenta. A little desaturated from that.
It's like a number 3 pencil.
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, and their heads were very smooth, and and it's funny because when I think about, like, if I think about the memory right now, because understand when I have these experiences, I should back up. I know I've learned over my lifetime that I'm a little bit of an oddity, in that my conscious memory like this kind of experience started when I was very, very young. I was understanding as a 2-year-old, before I could really articulate, like 1.5, 2, I realized why toddlers get so cranky. At least in my case, because I could not only understand everything that every adult around me was saying, but I had things to say back. I heard English in my head perfectly, but I couldn't make my body articulate it because I was still learning speech. And it pisses you off when you're a little kid. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so it was very cognitive, very realistic. This whole experience was very much like this experience I'm having sitting with you here right now. It's very not dreamlike at all. It was very real. Mm-hmm. So I'm standing, looking at them, and they're floating, and they're inviting me to come and fly with them. And I went, I looked at the situation and I went, I probably should ask my mom if it's okay if I go flying with the weird naked children outside my window.
It's probably a good idea to have. Yeah,
listen,
good thought to have.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
Just check in,
Don't eat after midnight.
Don't put me in water.
Don't put me. Yeah.
So, and it was weird, and I told them, I said, I probably should ask my mom, and I turned around and she was standing behind me in the room. And I kind of looked at her and I said, do you think it's okay? And she went through this whole thing in her head. I could see, and she was sort of articulating it out loud, but I could see her going, she was like, I don't know. I mean, it's outside. We don't know who these, who are these beings or who are these people? I think she said people. And it is floating outside the window. And what if you fell? And she went through the whole thing. And then she went, well, but it's happening and it's a rare experience. And she looked at me and she said, well, I'll tell you what, if you trust them and you think it's okay, you think you'll be okay, then I'm okay with it. And I went, okay, bye-bye. And I was floating out with them.
So did you remember how you went through the door or the window, or was it just you just went through?
It's weird. It was almost like an instantaneous transition. I was standing on the floor and then I was just out there and I was looking back through the window. Okay. Like I could see into the room from the outside. And then we were floating and, this is a second-story window, so I'm up off the ground. Mm-hmm. And we're floating and I'm like, this is far out. I was a hippie child, so far out was an acceptable word.
That was the cool thing.
I didn't say groovy.
But you did say you were in your crib.
I was in my crib.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're floating around. Yeah.
I'm floating around. I'm floating there, and I'm just like, it's almost like there are thermals in a way. Like I can tell that there's air, and so it's like up and down a little bit and moving around. And then, for whatever reason, I looked down at the ground, and it became very clear to me that I was 3 feet tall, so I'm over a story off the ground, which when you're 3 feet tall is like, might as well be 30 feet.
Yeah.
So I look down, and I panic, and I start to fall. And I'm falling, and going, and I was looking at the sidewalk. It was going, and I went, phoop, and I stopped 6 inches off the sidewalk. I was like,
it's like happy thoughts.
Peter
Pan, right?
Yeah.
And I looked up at them, and they went. The one looked down at me and kind of shook his head and waggled his finger at me, or I say he, I don't know, and went, can't do fear. Can't do fear. And I was like, got it. No fear. Okay, good. And then I floated back up. But then I kept floating.
Was the communication all telepathic? Or do you remember?
Probably.
'Kay.
Probably. You know, what's weird is every experience I've had where there's communication, at the time, it seemed like just conversation. But when I think about it, nobody's mouths were moving, right?
Yeah.
So it probably was telepathic. Anyway, so I floated up past the roof, and I floated up past the roof of the building as the sun came up in the east. And there were all these other people sitting up on the roof, like a whole bunch and they weren't like them. They were just like regular people sitting on the roof. And I floated up above that, and then I was back in the crib. Well, now anybody could go, oh, that was a very interesting 2.5-year-old dream, right? Yeah. So I was telling that story to someone else at my mother's house many, many, many years later. And I was sitting at her table, and I was telling the story about all this. And my mom was doing something in the kitchen. And when I got to the part of the story about her being behind me and the whole kind of palather in her head about whatever, I think she was like washing dishes or something, and I notably heard her drop a dish. And she turned around and she went, "That was real?" So she remembered it. My mom shared the experience from the other side.
Crazy. So you did get a shift in time then in that experience, technically, because you said you left the room at night and then were coming up as...
Well, like I said, there was enough light outside, so I think probably it was pre-dawn.
Oh, pre-dawn.
Because, like twilight, because looking outside the window, if it was night, they would have been basically silhouettes. Because the building next door was kind of a light color, right? But I could see the pink. I could see the color. So I think there was it's possible, now that I think about it, the entire experience could have lasted this long, right? Like literally the seconds before the sun came up, but not in my experience, which is a normal time dilation thing that can occur. So that was the first thing. And when I've reflected on that whole experience over a lifetime, the conclusion I kind of came to is that they started contacting me early because I had to be prepared for what was coming. And a big part of it was not freaking out, not normal human instinct to panic when weird things happen, right? And that went, because as you think about it, that was like really the foundational event. And what was the whole theme?
Was not to fear, right?
Can't do fear. Yeah, that didn't work all the time. But I was pretty fearless as a little kid. I was pretty fearless until my father passed away. When my father passed away, that things changed a little bit. But I used to like climb out. When we were traveling west, we camped along the way. And there was this one campground that had this tree, and this limb went out over a cliff that was like, I don't know, 50 or 60 feet down to the ground. And I was just, in my shorts, little hippie kid, climbing out on the branch, freaking out old ladies that were walking by the campsite, going, "What are you doing?" And my mom was like, "He'll be fine." That was sort of my mom's policy. He'll be fine.
Did your mom or any of your other family members ever mention having contact with these beings as well in their past, or?
No, they did not. And wow, I just remembered something else. Not really. My father, I have a feeling that my father was a sensitive, meaning that he was experiencing things. He just had no capacity to cope with it. So he died when he was 24, self-inflicted gunshot wound. This is a guy who was legitimately scared of the dark. He believed that vampires and werewolves were absolutely real. In fact, he made a cross that he wore around his neck so that he could ward them off.
Oh, wow.
And like I said, I think there was something, I've thought about this. I think there was something about the combination of my mom's genetics and his genetics that I got a lot of his sensitivity, but I got her sensibility. sensitivity and sensibility, good combination. Because I've been fairly fortunate that I've had a lot of experiences, but haven't really. I mean, I could have gone down because he was very paranoid, and it would have been very easy. I could see in a lot of the experiences I've had to get paranoid, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
But I just really don't. I mean, it's just not a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the government, but besides that,
Yeah.
everybody should be paranoid about the government, okay?
Yeah. Let's
Just as a standard rule.
Yeah.
Rule
So that was shortly after that you ended up picking up and moving then.
Yeah, we decided, they decided they'd had enough of the city, and we were going to go do the back to nature hippie thing, and headed west looking for our land, our place to make a stand kind of a thing. And it was a kind of a caravan. It was my uncle and my aunt in their 1949 pickup truck with the homemade canopy on the back of it, and our 1957 Ford with the homemade canopy on it that was made out of plywood they'd stolen off of the I-90, the Interstate 90 construction project, as a political protest to the building of the freeway. So we had 5 cats. So it was us, 5 cats, my mom, my dad, me, and 5 cats in this traveling vehicle. But yeah, so we got out to Washington and found that piece of land. My mom still lives there. In fact, she bought an additional 20 acres. So we have 40
Oh, wow.
acres up there. And it was completely undeveloped at all. It was just trees.
And this is, you said, is it Colville?
Colville.
Colville?
I differentiate because it's Colville as compared to what's here, which is Cole, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right.
Right. So no, it's Colville. It's north of Spokane. It's about 40 miles from Canada, 40 miles from Idaho.
Okay.
Just to give you a
Yeah.
general quad.
Gotcha.
So anyway, then we realized we were not going to survive the first winter because there was nothing there, and we got there in the fall. I turned 4 on the property. Like my 4th birthday was a cake that was baked by a campfire, right? With frosting they made out of whatever they had, and little cowboys and they made a little cabin that they made little canoe out of actual birch bark because that's what was there.
That's a legit birthday.
Yeah.
I
And
think
then
every
they put-
kid should experience that.
And then they put little lichen trees on it, and when they lit the candles, the trees caught on fire, and they were like, "Put it out," and I was like, "Let it burn," because I was 4. But anyway, we moved to Seattle for the winter, and a number of things. We picked apples in Tonasket and different things, but we got over to Seattle, and my dad never saw the property again because it was that fall. It was the fall of, because we got out there in 72, so it was October of 73 that he killed himself.
Did you have any siblings?
No.
Too? No one. Okay.
I did, but I ate them. I'm kidding. No siblings.
Don't be morbid. It was the pink children outside the window.
That's right. They were tasty.
Yeah.
Kind of like those Hostess snowballs.
Snowballs. Yeah.
Podcast
Just
got
kidding.
weirdly morbid. Weirdly morbid. Yeah.
It just took a turn.
New title. Yeah.
Weirdly morbid. That
Yeah.
should be a podcast.
That would be good.
Yeah.
So then fast forward. Do you want me to go to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. Fast forward to 1978. We had moved back after my dad died, and my mother was just, as you can imagine, she was not in a great state of mind, and we came back to the land. It's the only place we had to go, and so we just were going to make a go of it. And we got back there, I think, in the fall of 74. Cool. It was an awesome winter, 3 feet of snow, and it was fantastic. But we're 10 miles from town, and it was just me and my mom on pretty undeveloped land. I mean, it's very weird when I think back, how I grew up. It's very strange. Most people can't relate to the idea. I learned how to cook on a wood cook stove. That's because we had a wood cook stove, wood heat stoves. There was, we had outhouse. we bathed and drank in the winter out of water that we brought in snow that we melted on the stove.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Wow.
So I grew up very,
In humble beginnings.
very humble beginnings, but very almost like pioneer. I mean, it was very pioneer-like.
Yeah, sure.
What year was this?
78, right?
1842. No, I'm kidding.
42.
Well, let's see. We got back there. We traveled for most of 74, and we got back there toward the fall of 74. So that's when we,
Yeah.
And to give you an idea, I was 5 and then 6, right, in 74. So anyway, yeah. So by 1978, we'd kind of gotten things a little more figured out. Started a big garden, and I think we punched the well sometime in there and got power to the well, and then ran. You know what Romex is? It's the wire for wiring inside of walls. The wire that they wire houses with. We had a piece of Romex that ran through the forest across through the forest from the pump house over to the house, and we just wired an outlet on the outside of the house, and you had to not trip over the wire on the way to the garden.
There you go.
So we had that little bit of outlet. Otherwise, everything was propane and kerosene and wood, and
Wow.
in a little 150-year-old bunkhouse that the local neighbors out there, because they were all ranchers, the neighbors out there went, well, we got a bunch of hippies over here that are going to die. So they got a flatbed truck. They went out and found this old bunkhouse. The whole community, it was very Amish, came out and they put this 2-story bunkhouse and drove it out to our house. And then as a community came and put it in place and
that's really cool.
put blocks under and everything. And that's what I lived in, was that till I was, well, then we started building the house. That's the one she lives in now. But I mean, I lived in there for years. That was our house.
That's crazy.
Wow.
So anyway, going forward to 1978. So my mom got to a point where she just didn't want to do the winters out there. So sometimes what we would do is go rent an apartment or a place in town for the winter. And we rented in the fall of 78. We rented this place that was up 875 and a half North Walnut in Colville. So it's up on the hill. And it was this, funky, cheap place. It was sort of long and thin, kind of like a mobile home, like that shape. It wasn't a mobile home, but it was that shape.
Sure.
And it was built on top of 3 garages.
Okay.
Interesting recurring theme in Minnesota. Garage under. This was 3 garages.
Yeah.
If I kept going with the theme, it would have been 5, and then 7 garages, and pretty soon, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we moved into that in the autumn, and I had probably the most significant experience there. And it kind of went like this. Go ahead.
So we're at the 5-minute mark now. Should we pause again?
Yeah, this is a
and then
good place
just
to
restart it?
pause.
I was going to say, because this one is probably a little bit longer, too.
It is a little bit longer. It's a little more involved.
Okay.
Well, I can only hold my breath for long enough to go across once. So I come up, but usually I just try to push. So I'll catch my breath. So I don't know, in an hour,
28
it can be
each one, each card.
They should be,
I don't
Yeah,
know,
there's a book-
10, 12 times. But, it started out as just a thing I was going to do, and then it's become this weird thing that it allows me to focus and think about one thing.
I love that.
And so I'll swim across the bottom back and forth.
What?
Those are rolling right now, right?
Yeah, they're.
Oh, we're rolling? Okay.
Very good. So we're
Okay.
at your new house now.
So we're at the new house, and there is a significance to 1978, which I could get into. Well, I will get into later, but in fact, all of it there's a significance to the timing of it all. But that's a later topic. So anyway, my crib. No kidding. My bedroom was at the west end of the house because it was arranged east-west. And it was at the west end of the house, and there was a window and a door. Like if you open the door, you could go down these steps because it was up high. But anyway, that was my point, my POV. And I came into that waking dream state, right? And just a note, when I come into that state, one of two things happens. Either I sort of become aware that I'm in that state, and then the awareness leads to me ceasing to be in my astral state and going back into my body, which is accompanied by this very, like, imagine a sound that's more than a sound. It's like this intense vibration, and it's like, and it wakes me up. It's sort of like reintegrating is this harmonic that's really intense.
It's interesting because I've heard of that before. Like when people leave their bodies and stuff, it's always a vibration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and
that
it
comes with it. So
well, that's how I come. Like if it's gonna collapse, that's how I know it's collapsing, because it'll come up almost like in from my core, and then I'll hear it in my ears, but then I can feel it in my whole body, and it's like, ah. Well, I came into that state in the room, and I looked around, and it was the time of day that it was, which was night. And I think I was just starting to feel that vibration when all of a sudden my bedroom door was on the south side, and 7 beings walked into the room in a row. And they were... which, of course, kind of startled me, which was great because it stopped the descent a little bit. But the way they came in was very odd. So they were kind of in two separate groups. There was one group of 3 and one group of 4. I mean, they came in a line, but by the time they stopped, there was a group of 4 on this side and a group of 3 on this side. One member of the group of 4 was adult-sized. One member of the group of 3 was adult-sized. The adult in the group of 3 was a man, and he was a man. He looked very classically like my 3 sons, side part, haircut,
And did they look human or?
Well, they were human, but I'll get to the total description of them.
Yeah.
So they go ahead.
That's what I was wondering too.
Oh.
Like, I thought they were the same like pink ones that you saw, or how,
Well, these were, and I'll get to the bizarrity of it in a second. So they totally looked like a TV caricature of a traditional man, but like from the 60s, right? And kind of your...
Yeah.
And then the group of 4, the adult was a woman, and she kind of had, I don't know how to describe it. It's the kind of hair that goes like this.
So they were
Like
both kind of
60s,
from
yeah.
that era?
Both
like
from the same
Blue
era.
Book kind of.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And she was wearing a skirt and a blouse, and he was wearing, slacks and a button-up shirt. And the thing that was interesting is that the other 3 in her group were descending in size like they were children. And then in his group, there were 2 that were descending in size like they were children. But what was strange, apart from the last thing, which I'll get to, is that they were like exact clones of him. So this one looked exactly like him, but just
smaller,
shrunk down.
Weird.
Proportionally the same. And then the other one, the other one. So it was like, and there was about a difference of 3 years between them. So like this was a 3-year-old, that was a 6-year-old, or this was a 6. Actually, I think this was a 6-year-old in the males. This was a 6-year-old, and that was like a 9-year-old. And then in the females, it was like 3, 6, and 9. But they were exactly the same. They were like her exactly, but just shrunk down. Now, the notable thing about them is that they were made out of aqua blue light. So if you took like aqua blue light and made it into almost like liquid and poured it into a mold of that shape, that's what they were made of. They had no pupils in their eyes, but they had the definition of eyes, but there was no pupils. And I remember they were kind of smiling. And I remember the thing about it is that it was comical to me at the time. That's partially what stopped me coming out of the state, is I just was like, this is ridiculous. Like, it's ridiculously funny. It's almost like they were trying to present a caricature of a nuclear family that I would recognize as a traditional nuclear family. But it was just funny, right? Because I came from a hippie family.
Almost as funny as Charan just chewing on the mic.
Oh. You hear it?
Yeah.
Oh,
No, not really. It's
That
fine.
sounds like he's chewing on the mic, He's gonna break it. He's going to break it down.
I'm like, I think there's something.
Oh, I didn't think I hear it.
You should have done that. Just like what is it?
You
in,
should do it
in-
right into the mic.
No, I'm gonna do it again.
No, in American Dad.
Yeah,
Hang on.
exactly. like,
Exactly like that.
let's get some celery next time.
Carrots.
It's because it's a good story and he's eating popcorn.
Yep.
So
I'm so into this, by the way. Just keep going. It's so
Yeah.
exciting.
sure. I see how you are. So anyway, and there was this. So I saw them and recognized them, and I think it was also important because I've understood some things about the geometry, the numbers and geometry of that arrangement later, much later, and now it all makes much more sense of why they presented themselves in that way. So that was enough a distraction for me to kind of bring my focus back and realize that I had stopped the transition and I was in that form. And that was the first time I also really realized that I had to not try to move my body because that was the problem. If I tried to move my body, it was going to pull me out. So I just went, and it wasn't really a conscious thought. It was just, I'm just going to stand up. And so I just thought myself standing up, and I was standing up in front of them. But in that transition time from me laying down to standing up, they had changed. And they were all now, because understand, I'm 9 at the time. And so I'm however tall you are when you're 9, which is like, what, 4 feet or something like that. And they were all adult-sized, but they had a lot of those structural characteristics as the children outside my window when I was, 2. Except that, well, I'm not going to say except that, they had larger eyes. That's the one thing I always remember. Their eyes were more larger. They were larger and more almond shaped. But I don't want you to think that they're grays because they're not like grays at all. There was no.
So it wasn't like the full on kind of black.
No.
of the
They
whites
were
and
still blue.
everything.
They were still blue. I mean, they changed form, but they were still made out of blue.
But their eyes, I mean, tend to be full on black. Is that only privy to grays, or is that?
That's a gray thing.
Oh, okay.
It's a gray thing.
It's a gray thing.
You wouldn't understand. It's a great thing. So they had the kind of more almond-shaped eyes. In fact, the best description, if you've ever seen depictions of the style of artwork depicting people from the reign of Akhenaten in Egypt, where they have the slightly elongated craniums, longer, thinner necks like Nefertiti. They had a lot of those characteristics. And the best way to describe their bodies, that they had no gender of any kind, and they were actually naked this time. They were naked when I stood up, but they were. If you ever think of how Bruce Lee was built, he had a lot of physical strength, but he was very
toned.
Very lean,
They were
very
like
tough.
that, very lean, but very, very muscular, but very lean. They were like that. But no hair or anything.
Still that aqua color that you.
Yeah, the same kind of aqua color. I'm trying to think. Well, if you got a chance to look through the material I shared with you,
Yeah.
very often I use that color blue in my paintings and other things because that's where it all comes from. Kind of if you know paint, it's a phthalo blue. It's essentially a phthalo blue color. So anyway. And now they're all the same, and they're all in a line. And the one that was the dad, that was the one that I ended up interacting with after this. And I kind of call him the ambassador because he was the one I interacted with. And I went over, I was standing in front of him, and I kind of reached up my right hand and then took the 3 fingers of my, my pointer finger, index finger, middle finger, and ring finger, right? Not my pinky or my thumb. And I reached up toward his face, and he kind of bent down his left cheek toward me and let me touch his cheek and run my fingers down his cheek. And if you've ever put your tongue on a 9-volt battery, you ever put a 9-volt battery on your tongue?
On a daily occasion, but yeah.
He goes all the time.
Breakfast every day.
It's my coffee.
That's what it felt like,
A little
touching
shock.
his skin. So there was an actual
electrical charge type of thing.
little bit of a charge, and where my fingers touched his cheek, below his cheekbone, it left lighter blue tracers on his skin. Let me dragging my fingers down like this. And I was just like, this is cool. Like, I remember thinking at the time, this is pretty far out. I mean, I'm interacting with whoever this is. And then he then leaned really forward and turned his head so that his left eye was looking right at me. And I went out of the room through his eye. And I was suddenly floating in space, basically. And I was in this star field of blue, that same color blue, but blue stars that were drifting past me like this. And I was just floating in space. And in the distance, I could see that it almost looked like a fissure, like the side view of a galaxy, if you think of like the Milky Way from the side. And these things were obviously expanding out of that. And I'm floating, and then as I look at it, I start moving toward it, and it's moving faster and faster, and these stars are starting to go almost to the point where they're starting to have like streak trails. And then I go into the center of it, boom, and I'm standing back in my room. It was like, okay, I just touched your face. You know, I said hi, you said hi. Okay, I get it. Chill out with your kind of high.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
And at that point, so I'm standing there going, okay, that was cool. And at that point, they all turned in a single file line and just started walking out of my room. And I'm like, well, what do I do now? Do I follow? Is it over? Do I stay? And so I just started following them. And so I follow them. And it's interesting because, of course, they're just drifting because what I realize is they're basically energy beings. And they're just drifting through the house. The house is dark. I'm trying to navigate through the house in the dark without like running into chairs and things. And I had to get by my mother's bedroom and I didn't want to wake her up. So we got into the living room to the front door, which is on the east end. And of course, they got to just drift through the door. I had to figure out how to open the door quietly. So I open the door and I go outside. And we had there was like a little yard because it was on the side of a hill. So there was a little yard in front of our house, but very little. And then there was a little path that went up the bank to the street. Well, they went up the path, and I was following them. But by the time I got to the top, they weren't there. Now, the street is a fairly steep street that drops away, to the south. And basically, the house we were in was called 875 and a half because it was on the same property. It was like a sub-house of a larger house. And so the driveway that went into the main house came out down the hill just a little bit. Well, right there down the hill, there's a street light, right? And at that time, there was an open wooded area that was right across the street where all the neighborhood kids would go and play. It's built some rad jumps, let me tell you, man. Did airtime over anyway. And when you messed up, you went into the trees, and it was really unpleasant.
Not a good feeling.
It was not a good feeling. Anyway, so I looked down, and then down there over the street, and it was the width of the street, was this dark metallic gray disc that was just floating, like not even floating, it was stationary in the air, kind of where that driveway of the other house came out. And right across the street from the neighbors down past the wooded area, it was just there, suspended in the air. And it was notable. In fact, just recently, I've been really trying to isolate exactly what it looked like so that I can draw it. And also because of a lot of things that came later, there's a lot of geometry that I've come across since, and I'm trying to see how what I experienced there actually correlates to the geometry, because I think that the shape of everything I saw was directly related to this geometry. So anyway, so it's there. It's about, and we went in April, I went back and I took some people with me to Colville, and we actually went to the spot, and I told the story on the spot to them, said this is where the house was, and and I've never done that before. And we actually measured off the street, and the street was 25 feet wide, which means the disc was 25 feet wide. And once I understood that, because I've always said that inside the vehicle, it's not a vehicle, but we'll call it a vehicle for the sake of argument. I always said it was 10 times bigger inside, but it's actually not true. It's actually 3 times. It was 3 times. I realize now it's 3 times larger inside than it was outside. Anyway, so it's 25 feet across. It's basically a disc. It's got a large kind of like dome bulge on the top of it. So it's kind of dome shaped, but it's got a dome on the top. It's got a sub-dome, larger dome underneath that comes back from the edge, right? So it's a smaller diameter. And then there's a smaller little dome on the bottom. So it's a little small dome with kind of a surface, an equator, a larger dome that goes across, and then a bigger dome than the small dome on top. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. And what was weird about it was that no lights or anything. It was just very dull, dark, metallic gray. And it was affected by the street light. That was part of it. It was being lit by the street light. And it was probably the bottom of it. If you went from the bottom bulge to the ground, it was probably hovering somewhere between 6 and 8 feet off the ground. Like, you know, but again, it's a little difficult because I was 9, and so proportional, you know. But if I could guess, I would say it was somewhere between 6 and 8 feet because I know that I could walk under it.
And it was pretty smooth in its features. There wasn't like any
windows
or anything.
No,
like that.
no. There was no lights, no windows, no nothing. It was literally just like a solid object. But what was weird about it is that it was completely still. And to the point where like a hurricane could have been going on.
It wouldn't have affected it.
And you would have been distracted by how completely unaffected this thing was. Almost like it wasn't there. It was visible, but not there. So I come out and they're gone, and there's this thing sitting there in the air. And I walk over to it, and then all of a sudden I'm inside of it. And like I said, it's like 3 times larger inside. The odd part was that the whole interior was, everybody know what vacuumforming is, where you heat plastic and you can use a vacuum and it makes shapes. Like you can vacuum the baseball of a motorcycle helmet, right? Okay. That's usually vacuumforming. So if you imagine that it was white, shiny vacuum plastic, but the whole interior was that, and there were no seams. It was now no separate pieces. It was all one thing. It was all white, except for these big on the inside of the dome, because I was standing. So there was like a mezzanine around, and there was a bowl in the middle of the mezzanine, and then there was a dome overhead, which explains why there was a bigger dome on the outside and a smaller dome underneath, because it was related in that way structurally. So I'm standing on the mezzanine, and on the underside of the dome, there are these 6 gigantic screens that are in a hexagonal arrangement. So they literally were seamed together on the other underside of the dome. And what was weird, remember, this is 1978, right? 1978, no one would know what a plasma screen television was. I don't even think NORAD had plasma screen televisions at that point.
I still don't have one. So, just side note.
Side note. That's on you.
Yeah.
So what was bizarre, so I'm standing there, and now the ambassador is standing next to me to my right. And he's now 9 feet tall, like very, very large, but almost more slender. And was very odd. The one thing I noted was the movement. So because he was talking to me, but I realized telepathically, like later I was like, oh, he wasn't really moving his mouth. So he had this kind of strange movement about him where if he turned his head, as soon as his head stopped moving, his hand would start moving. If his hand stopped moving, his finger would move. Like it was perpetual state of motion. And he was still blue. Like he was still blue, only now he was wearing kind of like, you know what a kaftan is? It's like a long robe. Like they wear them in Morocco and Egypt. It's kind of like a long robe like that. He was wearing this long-sleeved robe thing. And he's standing next to me, and we're looking down into the bowl. And in the bottom of the bowl is almost like it's terraced. There are, levels. And on the levels, one of the levels, there are these 3 podiums that are kind of squared off, but they are sort of bent a little bit to match the circle. As I bash myself in the mouth. Anyway, so there's 3 podiums are there, and they're made out of the same white stuff, and they come up about waist high to them. I would have been able to stand behind it, but it was up, waist high. And they had a kind of slightly angled top, and they went around, like I said, the center. And there were 3 beings like him standing at each podium. Well, 1 at each podium. And this is an interesting thing. So sometimes, I understand, I have gone over and over and over and over this experience many times, and I will realize things that it didn't occur to me before. And in this case, I realized just recently, this year in fact, that the beings that were standing at the podiums were white, not blue.
Okay.
There was still energy, but they were white and wearing almost more like a toga looking garment. But they were doing this thing, but they were just exactly like him, but their hands were passing over, and there was nothing on the surface of the podiums. Like nothing. It was just smooth and white. And they were moving their hands over it, but I could tell what they were doing in this very graceful way is they were clearly operating something. Like there were, for them, from their point of view, there were, buttons and dials or whatever. Touch screen, which is another interesting thing. They were doing equivalent of what we would call kind of touch screen kind of.
Were they actually touching something though, or were they hovering over it?
They were hovering over it, but you could see that the hand would go and then the finger would move and then, and then they'd like this, but they would never touched it. So those 3 were doing that, and he said some things to me that I don't remember. Like I could tell he was telling me more things than
Then you can remember.
than I can remember. But all of a sudden he goes, okay, look over there. And he points at the screen that's across the mezzanine from us. He goes, look up there. And he goes, I want you to tell me what you see. And I looked up, and what was very odd is that they were sort of a dull gray color. And when he told me to look up there, they went from dull to black, just like a plasma screen does when it turns on, right? And I looked at it, and starting in the lower left corner, there was a sequence of dots that went ting, 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 and then around the dots were circles that appeared. Lower left, upper right. And then lines connected them, kind of like a network. And it went, and then the next screen over did the same thing, and then the screen behind me did it, and it went around like this. When it came back around, this one went blank. The one across me went blank. And it did it again, but multiplied. The number multiplied. There were way more. And then the same thing happened around. And it just went like that more and more and more. And it went faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until it was just like, really, really fast. And I just looked at it, and the only thing I could think of is I said, star charts? Mm-hmm. I mean, that was the thought that I had of these star charts. And he looked at me and he went, well, it's time for us to go. And I went, time for us to go? I am so ready to go. Let's go. And he goes, no, it's time for us to go.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh. He goes, you're not ready yet. And I was like bummed, like seriously bummed out.
Yeah.
And he goes, you're not ready yet. He goes, but we'll be back. And when he said we'll be back, so when he said, you're not ready yet, I was inside still. And when I kind of had that bummed out thing, we were up on the outside of the disc, because I remember that view of standing up there on the metallic disc, and I could see the ground.
Yeah. And
then he goes, but we'll be back. And I was standing on the ground. And then I woke up in my bed right then. And I immediately jumped up and ran to the window because I knew exactly where they should be.
Yeah.
And I looked out there and they weren't there. Well, as I was telling Johnny, the host, this is not something that happened then and then that was a thing that happened and it was over. This has been an ongoing thing my whole life.
With the same group of people, the same species?
Yeah, same beings. And I've come to understand more and more things about that experience the farther from it I get, and the more I kind of understand other things. So,
And they're all of these experiences have been kind of a positive experience. Yeah.
that's the one thing I should say. Absolutely benevolent, positive. There's nothing ever frightening, negative. There's no probing. Like there's nothing like that ever.
We were going to go into that, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask
You were
about
gonna
that.
you were gonna
We were
go
going to
in-
ask about how
you were gonna go into the probing?
Yeah,
Nice.
we're going to probe you with questions.
Probing. I have to go now.
So all these experiences you think they're tied to like because he said that you feel that they're all the same beings. But
I know they are
But the first ones that you describe them as pink, and now they're
blue, but then white, and I've recently also come to understand that.
like why they change appearance toward you. Oh yeah, we're
Oh, yeah.
probably
Let's
Okay.
reset real quick.
That's perfect.
my question.
You were about to say something.
You were.
I think I asked it. I was saying.
You were.
something.
You were.
I don't remember.
All right.
No, I want you to lean into the microphone and go.
You. Trust me, it works really great. Yeah, that's great.
There it is. Pringles.
That's so. You can take that out and
This
post.
episode is
Easy.
sponsored by.
Yeah.
It's not sponsored by.
Today's show is not brought to you by Pringles.
Yeah, we tried doing an intro with that to try to get Jack Link's jerky and Squatch soap.
Squat soap, yeah.
Didn't work.
Not yet. We will though, but we'd like to get some of those things going so we can
No,
like
they
give
made
that
us
to
an offer,
guests.
but we're just like, nah.
Yeah, we're holding out for we know how to push the envelope.
They made you an offer, but 50 cents wasn't quite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing is not quite what we want.
All right,
Well-
we're about ready.
Yeah.
All right.
Are we ready?
Yeah,
think
it's good.
so.
Okay.
Just real quick, I had a
Yes,
question.
please.
Each time that you came in contact with these beings, or even the ship, did you ever have any physical? Did you feel anything physical, like nausea, headaches? Because I've heard people coming out of these things having like migraines after a certain period of time, or feeling nauseous immediately after, things like that.
No, and I think that part of the reason for that, like I said, there's a good deal I've come to understand in the many years since then about what was actually happening during that period of time. I should make a note of two other things that happened that summer before we moved into town. One was, like I said, we lived in a big rancher community. So there were these big community picnics, right? And my mom was really into kind of natural foods and, think granola hippie, right? And she really wasn't a red meat eater anyway. She kind of more was into fish things. And so we didn't have a lot of meat around, right? But there was no rule that said I couldn't have meat. It was just, right, just wasn't there. Wasn't available. So when there was these big community picnics, I was able to go have literally everything that I wasn't normally supposed to have, right? I could have soda pop and, all the kinds of things that they have at those kind of, chips and all sorts of stuff. So I'd gone to this picnic that summer, and it was sort of, our property was down the hill, and you had to go across this big alfalfa field up to where they were having the picnic. And I was a kid that always ran around barefoot. Like I still do that now, but not in the city, in the house. In fact, I'm going to do Lake Blanche. I'm going to hike Lake Blanche barefoot. That's my next big hike.
Wow.
It's ambitious.
So, because I like barefoot, it's comfortable.
It's good for you too.
Yeah.
They've
Oh, it's
done
very
enough
good.
research that it's like really
Absolutely is. So anyway, I'm up at this picnic, and it's kind of starting to wind down. And they had these two big, giant, massive grills where they were making hamburgers and hot dogs and things. And they'd put a bunch of hamburgers on, but people weren't eating them at the end, and they were just going to chuck them. And I said, "Well, can I have them?" And they said, "Sure." So they gave me this stack of like 6 or so, hamburger patties that were cooked. And I left the picnic, and I was walking across the field, the alfalfa field, and I got about halfway across, and I felt kind of weird. Like it was almost like I felt like I was dreaming a little bit. The way I describe it is the world took a step back.
Okay.
And very, very clearly, I stopped, and very clearly this voice said to me, "This is not for you." And I looked at the hamburger, and it was very clear that that's what the voice was talking about. I dropped them in a gopher hole, which I'm sure I always thought about that later. There's probably some really annoyed gopher going, dude, really? Anyway, but I dropped him in the gopher hole, and I've never eaten meat since.
Wow.
I've been a vegetarian since age 9 for the weirdest reason you'll ever hear for being a vegetarian, which is a voice came to me when I was a child and said, this is not for you. Doesn't matter what anybody else. It's not ethical. It's none of those things.
So
it's just, this is not for you.
Do you think that was tied to these?
Absolutely,
things?
because I
So
know.
this time was just the voice, then it wasn't.
Yeah,
wasn't
this was
visually,
well, and
so-
this was the summer, like within a month or a month and a half from when the thing happened. And then the other thing that was very weird, it's nature, and this could be more coincidence, except there was this huge flock of ravens, gigantic flock of like 200-300 ravens, which if you know, for a flock of ravens is actually a lot. Not crows, ravens, full on ravens. And they were there that summer, and I was standing outside my mom's house, or our house, and I was looking east, and I watched that big flock of ravens come down and land on the hill, over across the way. And I was looking at it, and then they all took off like starlings. They all took off at one time, and right in the middle of them was a white raven, an albino raven. And I checked with everybody, because it was there all summer, this flock, and no one else ever reported or saw the white raven. I'm the only one who ever saw it. And I went, and I remember at the time feeling that sort of disassociated feeling, going, there's something weird about this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, those two things occurred. But what's interesting, in fact, now that I'm doing, started going to the pool recently just to exercise, but it's become a meditation process.
Cool.
And during the meditation process in the pool recently, in fact, day before yesterday, I was really thinking about the vehicle or the vessel or whatever you want to call it, the disc, because I realized it wasn't a vehicle. That's not what it is. It's more like an intersection. It's like a room that exists that allows for, it's almost like a portal, more like a portal than a vehicle. But I've been really working on remembering what it actually looked like what the structure of it is. I know what the general structure is, but really trying to pull the clear memory back into my head of what that looked like so I can render it. I want to draw it because I want to be able to see if it correlates to the geometry. So I'm going to be playing with the geometry and seeing how much the natural geometry actually defines what I saw. Anyway.
So that one that you saw, is that the only time that you
saw that? Yeah, I saw that. Was that time. But so in the pool, because I swim back and forth across the bottom of the pool, and I'll come up on the edge and I'll sit and I hang on the side on the edge. And I was looking up the other day, and over the pool was just really imagining the vehicle being there. And all of a sudden, the experience, the memory of the dots and the circles going across the screen came very clearly back into my head. And I went, this was a what if, right? I went, what if every one of those circles and dots actually represents one of these vehicles? That it really isn't a star chart. It's a network of portals, essentially, that are interconnected. But that are actually only one. But what they're doing is they're bending space-time to appear to be in multiple places at different times and different spaces, but they're really not. It's all one thing that they can bring through that portal, but because they probably exist in a non-linear space-time, they can experience all of it at one time, but they can also separate it out into separate experiences. So basically, the conclusion I've come to is that, first of all, are they extraterrestrials? Meaning, are they not here? Well, yeah. But I've actually come to the conclusion that they're trans-dimensional beings more than they are extraterrestrials. Mm-hmm. They are able to move in and out of different spaces, different dimensions. The colors. That was one that actually came during the filming of Alien Country. One day I got up to go drive down to Spanish Fork, and all of a sudden I had this... you know what chakras are? You're familiar with chakras? Yeah. So I had this chakra chart on my wall, And I looked at it one day, and I realized that the what is it? 5th chakra, which is the throat chakra,
Mm-hmm.
is their color blue.
Oh, that
It's
aqua
that
teal.
aqua teal blue. And I went, of course it is, because that's when they're communicating with me. In other words, the colors have to do energetically with what's going on, right? So why were they pink? Because that's closer to root chakra, which is all about fear and foundation. They were actually communicating with me from a base foundational root chakra energy. Then in 1978, they were communicating. It was all about communication. It was literally about, do I understand? Can I communicate? And then we get into the vehicle, and the 3 of them are white, which is all of it as one harmonious color, right? It's all the presence of, what is it in pigment? White is the absence of all color. In light, it's the presence of all color, right?
And there's got to be a correlation with feeling that vibration and the alignment of chakras. When you're talking about that vibration, you hear that a lot in people that meditate and practice
Right.
these.
Well, that's where they do that,
yogi exercises.
right?
Yep.
And those create that
Yeah.
frequency creates that. Yeah,
Which is
So that's
interesting
really
because
interesting.
I've
that's
never
all sound is too, is vibration. Anyway.
I've never seen. It's interesting when I think about that. Oh, and then it was very weird because I got on, like, literally I had that epiphany, and then I had to get on the road to drive to Spanish Fork down to Set.
Yeah.
And I got on the freeway, and I'm not kidding. I got on the freeway, down the ramp, merged onto 15 southbound, and right in front of me was a van that had been wrapped, a wrapped, like a vinyl wrap, and it was blue Raven solar, and it was that color. And I went, okay, that's a little on the nose. Okay, yeah, I get it, all right? I understand what you're trying to say. But I mean, literally, I merged onto traffic, moved traffic, and I was behind that vehicle past Point of the Mountain. And it was the color, and it was blue Raven solar. I went, okay, well, that was weird. I get a lot of that, though. I have a lot of weird. Happens often. Anyway, but the thing that I also put together was the star field. When I went through his eye, the star field had the same overall pattern as the randomness of the circles and dots. And I went, that's why I wasn't ready, because they showed me the real thing, which is the star. They're not stars, they're intersections, essentially. They're intersections in probability. So each one of those would have represented one of these
Like ships or portals or something, right?
portals, and they pulled me out, because that's the thing. I went through his eye, right? It pulled me out of this experiential intersection and gave me the objective view of all of them. And so I'm looking at that, and I just was in the pool, and I went, oh, that's why I wasn't ready yet, because they showed me the real thing and then showed me the two-dimensional
TV model.
model of it, and I didn't put it together. I didn't put together that what they just showed me was these were the same thing, and that what I was inside of at the time was one of those intersections. They were trying to see if I could put it all together, and I didn't. So they're like going, yeah, well, you're not ready yet. And there's another brief deviation.
I mean, I guess you were 9, so
yeah, I was going to say 9.
Yeah.
This
Well, you
9-year-old.
said when you saw it outside, it was in an intersection. It was literally on the street, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point that I've never thought of until you said it
See,
right
Well,
now.
is that why?
Yes.
That's why they're like helping you, trying to like visualize, like giving you same with the colors, right? Like something that we understand as humans. That's what they're trying to like just give you these.
They were apparently I'm special needs, and so they were doing everything they could.
colors and shapes.
Yeah.
They go, now just put the cube in the square hole.
Yeah.
So I have kind of a personal question like for you with all that. Do you
Hey, I'm just kidding.
do you ever feel that it's somehow tied with your father? Have you ever had like a feeling that any of that's ever tied with your
In what way?
that he's reaching out to you maybe, or do you believe in any of that?
He so I think that he is okay. Let me put this in a way that will make some sort of sense. When in the early 90s, I asked someone who was a friend of mine who knew how to do past life regression, And I was like, I'm very interested in that. Even if it's not past life, I just like to do a regression back to that incident to see what is recorded, in my head. And we did that. And so she took me back. And then she took me back. She goes, okay, when you were 9, da-da-da-da-da. And there was nothing. Like it was blank. And I went, that doesn't surprise me because I could see it being a protected file.
Yeah.
Well, when we got back to, she goes like this, she goes, okay, we're going to take you into the womb. And when we went into the womb, I had the weirdest thing happen. I remember being in the womb and doing this thing with my hands. I went like this with my hands, and these little tetrahedrons came out of my hands. 7 of them, I think, came out of my hands, and then I was playing with them like with levitation. They were spinning around in circles, and I was doing things with them, and then they went back into my hands. And I remembered at that point, I could hear my mother. And my mother was very young, and she was kind of freaking out because she was pregnant and didn't know. Let me smack the microphone again. Could you eat a Pringle? Just as a distraction.
Please.
But I remember telling her, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay because this really isn't about you. Like, I told my mother that. And then the person who was doing the thing said, where were you before? And that's when it got strange. Where were you before this?
Yeah.
And I went, and I immediately started speaking in the collective we. It was no longer I, it was we. And I said, we've been very curious about this planet for a long time. I kind of remember myself saying this too. It's like, we've been very curious about, and basically wanted to come here. And I found myself laying on a slab, in a weird stone slab in a weird dark stone room, like I was dead or asleep. And it was something about being a navigator, and I started explaining that the reason that most people were seeing flying saucers, the reason they're saucers, is that they are actually energy construct vehicles, and they react to the gravity. So the truth is they're actually spherical. But when they get closer to a mass, they flatten out because the gravity compresses them. And that it really is more like a room that you can, it's like Dropbox. You can walk in one side and you can walk in from the other side, and those are different places, right?
Well, even the Earth is a prime example because most people say it's actually oval-shaped.
Well, yeah. Yep.
In the astrophysics world. And
which would make sense because of
general.
the sun. Anyway. Anyway, long and the short of it is that I definitely was not here. And one of the interesting weird things, I'm very interested in history and archaeology and those sorts of things, especially mythology and creation myths. Creation myths are very, very interesting to me, or cosmogony, as is the real term, cosmogony. And I started finding these strange correlations. The Egyptian creation myth is about 8 primordial beings that in a circle essentially are across from each other, and it was the negative space inside of them that produced matter and light and the world, right? So they were like, it was like matter, antimatter sort of interaction, right? I found something very similar in Norse mythology. I found something very similar in Chinese mythology. I started finding this repeating thing about the 8 with a center. And I thought about that with the 7 that came in the room. And it occurred to me, I went, there were the 4 females and the 3 males, right?
Then you was the 8th.
And then I'm the 8th.
Yeah.
So my suspicion is, and it is a question more than it is a suspicion, am I one of them? Am I simply inhabiting a spacesuit in this little intersectional construct because I'm the explorer here. I'm the observer explorer here. And that they are staying in contact with me, right? Because I'm still part of their collective, right? And it's also this whole other thing about triangles and tetrahedrons, and a triangle is the simplest way to define a circle. It's the simplest geometric shape to define a circle, right? A tetrahedron, which is a 3-dimensional triangle, is the simplest geometric way to define a sphere. And in theoretical mathematics, a tetrahedron produces its opposite interwoven with it. So if you know what a tetrahedron is?
Like a pyramid?
It's like a pyramid, but it's a pyramid that has a triangle on the bottom as opposed to a square.
Okay.
So it's 4 sides, and they're all equilateral triangles, right? Well, if you go from the point through the center, it goes through the center of the opposite triangle and establishes another point, which means, I'm saying just the mathematics does that. So it will create the opposite tetrahedron woven through the tetrahedron, which creates a figure with 8 points. So I think what the Egyptians and others were actually talking about is not a flat surface with 8 on it. I think they're actually talking about that structure with the 8 points with a center in the middle, which would go back to the circles on the screen with the dot in the center. It's a sphere. Because what is a circle? A circle is a 2-dimensional representation of a sphere in 3-dimensional space, right? Mm-hmm. So what they really were talking about were spheres, and that ties into the star field. Those were spheres of light, right? Spheres of light that I was going by. So I just put that all together in the last week. So it never really stops. How are you?
We're good.
We got like 10. I mean, let's just take the rest of the time to just kind of reflect on like the stories that you've told.
But do you want to hear the last story?
Oh, we got another one.
There's
one.
more.
I'm sure you have. Like
no. There's one more that's related to this cycle.
To all of this.
Yeah.
Do
you want to just pause and start?
8 minutes right now.
Unless you can do it in 10 minutes.
I don't know. I can try. If I can't, we can pick up.
Okay.
So then in 1996, I was done with college. I'd gone back to Colville because I went to college in Olympia, Washington. I went back to Colville, and I was working. That's when I was working at the high school with the woman. Mm-hmm. Well, I wasn't working with her. She was the head of the art department, and I was an one-on-one individual assistant. So I worked with kids that the school district thought would be a problem. So I would be assigned those kids and work with them one-on-one. Well, I was in this house that I'd rented, and I laid on this couch one day, and I was laying on the couch, and I have this problem that if I fall asleep during the day, especially if it's light, like there's sunlight out, I will almost always come into a waking dream state. I can make myself go into a waking dream state if I fall asleep, especially if it's warm, because it's miserable. I get miserable that way. It's uncomfortable. I feel hot and sweaty and it's bad. But it will move me into that state. Well, I was laying on the couch, and I fell asleep, and I had 4 dreams in a row. And it was odd because the 4 dreams in a row, I noticed that in the first dream, I kept hearing this repeating thing in the background that I couldn't quite follow. I didn't know what it was, but I could tell it was repeating. Second dream, I was picking out that it was words, like it was like a, I don't know, it was a repeating stanza. Third dream, I started realizing that parts of it rhymed, right? Fourth dream, I heard the whole thing, and in the fourth dream, there were all these aliens running around in the dream. And when I woke up, I completely remembered it. I remember it to this day. It said, "When I was young, I left the path to find the truth of free. I searched until I found a pool beneath an ancient tree. I stood atop 6 circling stones to see what I could see. Behold, I spied a one-eyed fool winking back at me." That formed out of wherever, over 4 dreams, woke up. That I've also realized later was actually a precursor to what came next, which was one day. So I had told this teacher friend of mine about what happened when I was 9. And about, a week or 2 weeks later, she comes into school in the morning. It's like 7:30. She goes, "Ugh." I said, "Well, how'd you sleep?" And she said, "Not very well." Why? She goes, "Well, your little blue buddies came and visited me last night." And I went,
"Oh, wow."
I went, "Really?" She goes, "Yep. I'm dreaming along, minding my business. My dream just fades to black, and 2 blue beings come up to me and go, 'We're really sorry to interrupt, but We really need to get this to him, and he's not listening.
Wow, breaking news.
And so at that point, she said that all of a sudden, very fast, a whole sequence of symbols went out of the dark, out of the black, and they were blue. And they went, and then she was like, she went back to sleep. And I go, well, what were they? She goes, just a second. And she opened up her notebook, and she went, just a second. And literally in 20 seconds wrote down a line and another line of characters. And the first line was 7 characters followed by a single character followed by 4 characters. And the bottom line was 6 characters kind of offset underneath the original 7, and then one separate character over here. And she wrote them down very, very fast.
But she remembered what they were?
Yeah.
I was going to say, she retained all of that in that one instance.
Talking about characters as like in the alphabet, or like
no, they were
just
like
characters?
alien characters, right?
They're a variety. They're in the
Squigglies.
Did you see them?
Yeah. Yeah, he shared the file to you too, so you can see all those.
So it's in Dropbox. So I looked at it, and because of a lot of kind of thought experiments and things I've been doing in college, I recognized a lot of the geometry in them. I was like going, no, this looks like this and this looks like that. I was like, but I went, I don't quite get it. Is there any more information? And she goes, hang on. She closed her eyes. She goes, hang on. And she went and wrote in 15, 20 seconds a second set. So the first line was 7 characters followed by 7 characters. So it was 14 characters. And then there was a space, and she wrote 2 characters in that space. And then a line below that was a character, just a second. Because it was the W and the hand, and then wrote the word raven, and then there was this other symbol that was like a sun with a dot, and then the word big deer and the word frog. But they were written words. And I went, okay. And I looked at it, I said, well, that was helpful but not helpful. And so she gave it to me. She ripped it out of her notebook. Here you go. Okay. So I took it, and I have contemplated and studied that since 1996. I don't have the original anymore because it was written on recycled paper and it written in purple ink, and it literally disintegrated. But I made photocopies of it before. And so what you see in there is a digital version of the photocopy that I then, based on her description of the dark, I just reversed it so that the black lines were white and the background was black, and tweaked it blue so that it was as close to what she described how they came in the first place. And that's how I contemplate them. I have a blow-up of it that I keep in a frame on my wall at home just to look at and reference. But the level, so let's go devil's advocate, right? She made it up, right? Let's just say she made it up.
Sure.
If she made it up, the elegant geometry in it, once I started to understand how it mechanically worked, then full points to her, bully to her, because it is very sophisticated and very complex. It's all about triangulation, and it creates a whole system of interactive triangles inside of hexagons. It's very complex. So those are what she wrote were essentially seeds that once you understand the mechanics, you start to realize that they're seeds that actually are part of larger geometric constructs.
Picture.
Yeah. So, and then down below, and one of the things below was a verification. And the verification, I realized years later, was it showed one of them is a hand like this, and above it is an eye. It's me touching his face. It was a little indicator of saying, yep, this is what happened when you're 9, just so you know it's us. And then there's a little scarab on one side, and anyway. But yeah, that's I mean, I could do a whole just with the message with it in front of you, so I could talk about it because it's taken me a long time. Yeah. The one thing that's interesting is in 2006 is when I had the first real breakthrough about it. I was living in Sedona. This was post Los Angeles, and
I think we need it. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
we're out of.
Okay, well let's go. Let me do this part because this is about it's a shroom.
Yeah.
Shroom,
See?
which also helps you see things.
Hey, listen.
You don't know.
Yeah. So we should do some shrooms right after this. Is what we're saying.
Yeah.
No, do shrooms before the show.
Yeah.
About 45 minutes before the show.
Yeah.
And people go, I don't know what these people are talking
We'll
about.
just go into it. The lights will be off. We'll have those
Yeah.
on. We'll just be speaking in a different language without realizing it. Make up our own language.
Oh. I'm just so I can be part of the group.
Yeah.
This is great. This is so great.
We're fantastic.
Are we rolling now?
No, you're good.
We are.
Kind of. Oh wait, yeah, we are.
You know what? Real quick.
Pause it.
More coffee. Well, just keep going.
Okay.
Okay. Am I waiting? Okay.
You're good.
So, in 2006, I'd worked in the film industry in LA for 7.5 years, and I burnt out in LA, which is easy to do. And I'd gone to Sedona just to kind of chill. And I was living there. And in 2006, I was sitting on my porch, and I was working on a commission for someone, a painting commission for someone, and I had to do a lot of thinking about it. And in the process of thinking, I started. I mean, it was intense. It was one of the first times ever in meditation that I went so far down the internal rabbit hole that I looked up and the world didn't look real. Like I felt completely disassociated, and everything was kind of shiny, you know, like when you use a diffusion filter, you know, and polarizing filter, right? So, anyway, I was sitting there and I looked at the message, and there's a spiral. One of the things is a spiral, and for some reason I locked onto the spiral, and it made me think about this archaeological site called Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, which was the center of the Anasazi world, and they found a calendar there, and the calendar is very, very sophisticated. It's a probably one of the most sophisticated paleo calendars in the world. It measures time by the noonday sun, not the rising, and not stars. It uses the sun and the moon. And it's basically 3 slabs of stone leaning against a wall. Under those slabs, there's a spiral with 19 turns cut in the spiral. And it's got a little spiral on the upper left. And at noon on the summer solstice, a dagger of light goes right through the center of the spiral and then retracts up. On the winter solstice, a dagger of light goes to the middle and a little dagger of light goes to the spiral on the side. On the equinoxes, it does something very similar. I think the vernal equinox, it does 2 daggers on either side and 1 little dagger through the center. And on the autumn equinox, it does just 2 daggers of light. Now, if you know anything about the engineering required to make 3 slabs of stone create that specific pattern of light, it's incredibly sophisticated, right? Based on different times of year, right? Well, that circle, the spiral, also has 19 turns on it. Well, it turns out that the moon, the orbit of our moon, right? So the moon goes around the Earth, right? But in its orbit, it has a wobble. The whole orbit wobbles. And it wobbles by 10 degrees, approximately 10 degrees. Well, that 10-degree wobble, it takes 18.65 years for it to complete the wobble.
So it's a very slow wobble.
But there are 19 spirals, 19 turns on the spiral. And it also turns out that if you go to that site under the full moon, the full moon creates daggers of light that will intersect over a 19-year cycle where the moon is in that wobble.
That is crazy.
Wow.
So that's solar-lunar coordinated calendar that has been working precisely since at least 870 AD.
Wow.
And So I'm sitting, and what they call it in the wobble, when it gets to its northernmost extent of the wobble, they call that a minor standstill because it stops before it starts to go back, right? So this is a minor standstill. When it gets to the lower part, it's the major standstill. 2006 just happened to be a major standstill year, right? We're at a major standstill. And for some reason, it just hit me that and the spiral. And I started going like this. I went, well, wait a minute. If this is a major standstill, that means that 18.65 years ago, there was another major standstill, right? And I correlated that back and I went, okay, that's 1987, roughly, from 2006. And then I went, well, when was the last minor standstill? And I counted back and it was 1996. The year the message came, right? Mm. And I went, okay, well, what was the last minor standstill before that? 1977, 1978.
No way.
The last major standstill before that
72
was 1969. I was born in 68. I was born, and I realized the standstill cycles last about 3 years. The middle, the influence of it. And guess what else happened in 1969? We landed on the moon and Woodstock. So the culmination of the entire 60s, whether you were counterculture or whether you were part of the space race thing, all happened within a month of each other in 1969, which was right almost exactly during a major standstill. Wow. And so at that point I went, so that's why they spread it out, because they were actually showing me that there was a rhythm that I had to understand. There was a larger cycle rhythm. So I started thinking about that. And in 2019, I sat down. I said, you know what? Pardon me. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to use 2006 as my year zero, because I know when the standstill happened then, the major standstill. So I'm going to start measuring back, mathematically, calculating back, and see how things fall. It was insane when I started actually doing it, because I realized not only... So there are three things in this cycle. There's a major standstill. There's the minor standstill. Well, actually it goes minor, major, and in between is a trough, essentially a transitional period between them, right? Mm-hmm. And I started realizing things about the troughs. There was a major or a minor standstill right at the beginning of the 60s, right? Excuse me just a second.
No,
you're fine.
Too much talking and air conditioning. There was a major or a minor standstill. What happened? Eisenhower was replaced by Kennedy. Kennedy was the optimism president. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to change the world, right? The minor standstill cycle ended, went into a trough, and he was killed in the trough. He was assassinated in the trough. Mm. And then all the things that he said, equal rights, right? The they don't want to talk about it, apparently.
Yeah.
But Vietnam got worse and all these things happened. And then there's this major standstill where everything he said during the minor standstill happened in the major standstill. Everything. Equal right, the civil rights. The civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. 68, right? All was codified by what? Martin Luther King's assassination really made him into a martyr, which suddenly made everything that was going on, it brought it into focus, right? It said, yes, and this must change, right? Then you had Woodstock, which was the culmination of the whole hippie thing, and it really was the high point. Everything diminished after Woodstock, like the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what major standstills do. They manifest everything that was thought about over here, manifest it, and then wash it away so that a new cycle can start. So what was happening when I had my experience in 78, 77, 77, 78? Everything happened. Probably one of the most significant films in the history of films came out on May 25th, 1977, and it changed everything, and that was Star Wars. Star Wars changed. It was the first blockbuster. It was the first film people ever went and saw 12, 14 times. Lines around the blocks. That was Star Wars. It changed. It was so culturally significant. If you think about, like, people go, "Oh, Star Wars." Star Wars brought into social public popular consciousness ideas that are essentially Zen Buddhism. It's Bushido. It's all of these concepts that, because if you talk about it Zen Buddhism, middle America isn't going to get it. But if you talk about it as the Force in the context of light and dark and da-da-da-da-da-da, which I saw it when I was 8 in the theater. I saw it the second week it was out in 1977. And it was blowing people. Like, you have no idea the level of mind-blowing that movie did. And then Empire Strikes Back just amped it up. And then everybody was let down by Return of the Jedi. But that's another story.
Well, that also set the stage for Alien to be made,
Oh, yeah.
I remember there was some, correspondence where Alien was going to be too hard to get made or something.
Yep.
And something happened on that forefront.
And it was Star Wars basically took the B movie concept and turned it into something else. But there was also this whole consciousness shift where people were suddenly okay with meditation and with a lot of things, people that wouldn't normally be okay with it. It also changed merchandising. You realize he was the first person to ever merchandise a movie. And that was the one thing. They paid him $400,000, I think, to make the movie. But he said, "Okay, that's fine, but you're going to give me control of the licensing." And they were like, "Sure," because they didn't. 20th Century Fox didn't care. It made him a billionaire, right?
They still make. I mean, to
Yeah.
this day, it's insane.
It's insane. But it was definitely a game changer. The other movie that came out right that same time was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it was the first movie ever to portray the whole idea of UFOs, like Project Blue Book, all these things that were not being talked about, and it portrayed the extraterrestrials as positive. Aliens were always portrayed in movies as a threat and negative and da-da-da-da-da-da. This was the first movie where they went, no, this could be a thing, right? That was all in 77. There were a lot of other things that went on that you could go into that were like cultural changing paradigms, right? And then you get, into the 80s, into 87, 88 was the major standstill. It's kind of a weird thing for me because to me the what I call the swell, the minor standstill, is almost of more significance than the major standstill. It's like these are the ideas.
What was the cycle again? How many years? 18, you said?
It's 18.65 years to go from minor to minor.
Minor back to minor.
Yeah.
So minor to major is half that.
Minor to major is 9.3, something like that.
So, are you saying every minor and major standstill you had? That's when they contacted.
Well, the during the minors, that's when they were contacting me.
So when's the next minor?
Okay, so we just ended a major. Actually, it's very funny. When I did the calculation in 2019, I went forward in time just to see, right? And I went, well, troughs, it turns out, are all about they're transformative. It's how you take an idea. Like you drew a drawing on the paper, right? But then you say, I'm going to get in the car and go to Home Depot and I'm going to buy the materials. That action of getting in the car and going is the step toward actualization, right? That's the transformative act, where this is an idea, this is a concept, this is the beginning of the manifestation, right? So when we came out of this last cycle, which was 2015, 2016, it was right in that area, and I was watching what was happening on the larger scene, right? Not just to me personally, but what was happening in a larger state. And it was, and I went, when they were having the election, this was during the election, I went, And the one thing that's going to happen here that nobody expects is that Donald Trump is going to get elected because no one believes at all that this will happen. But there are a lot of people who had the thought form, I don't know what it is, but we need to do something different than what's been going on. Good or bad, we need to do something different than what's going on. And Donald Trump won. And I went, yep, that makes perfect sense. And then we were coming up because the last trough was last June. And I went, and in fact, at the beginning of the year, I was telling people, I'm going, well, it could get kind of interesting in June. And I go, why? Because it's the bottom of a trough. And the last time we were at a bottom of a trough like this, the Twin Towers fell. That's the equivalent trough to this trough. And I went, yep. And then all of a sudden, COVID happens, and then the riots and all this stuff. And I'm going, yep, it's going to get pretty interesting here in June. And we were coming right up on the summer solstice in June. And I'm going, And then I said, watch, after June, it's going to start to diminish. It's going to still be going for a while, but it's going to start to diminish. As we headed into the election cycle, what happened? The riots became less of a thing. They were still, Portland, but Portland's stupid. But anyway, that was going on, and then we're getting closer, and it's like, and of course, and I already predicted it. I said, yep, he's going to lose the election, but we're going to come out of this trough. We come out of this trough in 2022, I think. I have to go look at my charting. It's either 2022 or 2024. We come out of this trough, and I went, well, yep. And then we're going to be into, because that was a swell, or essentially a minor standstill. We're going to come into a major standstill, which means all the things that were projected during the minor standstill are going to manifest. I anticipate that this next wave is going to be very, very interesting. Very, very interesting.
In a good way? Or
I'm just going to say interesting. The truth is I don't really view any of it as being good or bad. I kind of view it as just there are cycles and trends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like you say, it's transformative too. So it could be
transformative. I mean, the caterpillar probably thinks that, dying and becoming the butterfly is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But the butterfly says, well, no, it's not bad. It's just very, very different.
Yeah.
We're changing your experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's essentially that's the little tidbit that came out of there. And it's just continued. The whole thing with the message and everything has continued from there. And it's still going. Like, I think a big part of, just to sum up, I think a big part of what all this has been is that they were trying to get certain parts of my brain working in a way that it would create a perpetuation of the ideas, that I would become more and more in alignment with this, because it's definitely higher frequency stuff. Like, I've noticed when I have a period of time where I'm having a lot of insights, the world gets bizarre. Yeah. Very, very bizarre. Mm-hmm. So, questions?
That's really interesting.
Yes, you in the back. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
A lot. I mean, so you started taking sacred geometry in college, you said?
I was looking into it. I was studying sacred geometry to a degree, but just geometry and mathematics in general.
Mm-hmm.
But from the point of view of an artist, because that's what I fundamentally am, is an artist, which is another reason why I think that they kind of came to me, is that, Einstein did it with numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing it with numbers. I'm doing it with
art.
With visuals. It's more about what you can actually see, right? Same kinds of things.
Yeah. That's why with shapes and colors, makes sense.
Have you ever kind of felt a push to kind of show those symbols to some other people, like maybe some professors or someone that are more affiliated with that?
I have absolutely had that feeling, but what it was,
Pull that up. Where is that? I can't find it.
It's in your mail. Hraefn sent it to you.
Is it in that folder? It's not that, is it?
No, that's our stuff.
I felt like I wanted to do that once I understood a little more about what I was showing them, like my own understanding, and I'm getting there.
Okay.
But what happens is every time I do that, all of a sudden I have new revelations about it all, and it makes much more sense. Mm-hmm. And then I get lost down that rabbit hole, and then I go, oh, right, because what I was doing was The one thing I was going to say is that I am collaborating in many ways with a wonderful human being named Jessica Myrup. And we are going to take the experience, especially the thing when I was 9, but with elements of the rest of it, and we're going to, she's an artist too, we're going to write a children's book in that format about my experiences. Because I feel like, it's a great format, very visual, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I can include all kinds of symbology and elements and things from it as just background elements, right?
Sure.
But I feel like it could also be very helpful to other children, because I think that children very often have non-ordinary experiences, and the adults around them who are not in alignment with it poo-poo it, or
they tell them to get practical,
or they tell them, it's a dream.
It's a dream, yeah.
Right. And I go, what if a child could have a children's book that was this adventure that when they got to the end of it realized it was based on something that actually happened, right?
Could be cool.
That would be really interesting.
So
that could bear a whole new generation of artists in general.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're very pre-stage. I've got to still sit down and figure out how to break down that story into small segments so that we could break it into pages.
Yeah.
Right. So that we could, make it into, just thinking about the formatting it as a book. And we're actually going to collaborate on it. She's going to do the artwork of me and them, and I'm going to do borders above and below that have symbology and other things in them, from it, to sort of talk about in a almost hieroglyphic way what energetically is going on in those moments.
Where's the photocopy of the
The photocopy? I don't know if there's a picture of the photocopy in there, but
Oh, okay.
here.
Yeah, I was really curious to see that.
Is
Is that it?
Yes, that's the message right there. Oh, my phone is off.
That's crazy. Have you seen all this, Charan?
I think you shared it with me, right? Yeah.
That is crazy. Does she
So if you think that the top 2 lines she wrote in about 20 seconds.
Didn't you say that she was skeptic too about this whole topic in general?
I mean,
when you talked to her about it.
She was.
Has she ever seen it? Has she ever had visions or any experiences like that before?
I mean, I think that you can't have something like that happen if you don't have certain sensitivity already. And I know she was kind of into tarot cards and things, but not like this.
Very interesting.
Not like that.
Yeah, frog. That's great, right? Yeah.
Well, and by the way, I think that the one thing is, because there's only 3 written words in there, I think the significance of those is that they are phonetic and that they are spoken. The idea is that they are sounds, not symbols.
Okay.
There's a resonance to the words.
Certain vibration frequency, I would assume.
Right. Cold?
Oh no,
That's very cool.
So, and like I said, those are the root experiences. I'd love to be able to, you guys think about it or whatever, and let's talk more.
Yeah, we'll do a Q&A and next time we go live or something.
Yeah, we were actually considering that, like doing a
next time
live
we have you
session
on,
and
we'll do
having
like a-
someone send questions in, just about anyone's experience.
I
And
think that's smart, because that'll definitely
that.
get him to be like, oh yeah, I forgot this detail or I forgot that detail.
Well, and
Yeah.
like I said, there's new information coming all the time.
Well, even discussing it, you never,
Yeah.
with the intersection thing, it being in the street, you
Yeah.
said you never thought about that.
I had
before.
not thought about that. That's brilliant, actually.
That's what's cool about just sharing. When you talk with groups, they just have different perspectives that you don't think about, and that's
Well, it's because everyone has their own information, right? They
Yeah.
have their own
Sure.
database, and that's one of the things. Is this building shaking?
probably.
If someone goes up the stairs, it shakes the whole room. So
Okay.
it could just be that.
Well, this whole thing is sunken. You see how it curves right there?
Oh yeah.
There was some water damage a while ago, and it just kind of. And I think when that earthquake happened.
Yeah, all too well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was.
Oh, you were probably over here, right?
Well, I wasn't here when I wasn't there, but
Okay.
it trashed our shop.
Oh, yeah.
It trashed our shop, and my apartment. Everything fell down because I'm on the top floor of a building that was built in 1926.
Mm.
So it went boom, and it was 7:00 in the morning. I mean, everything fell off my shelves.
Ugh.
things fell over and blocked the door. I couldn't even. I had to.
That
lift.
that day was crazy.
I have something to add to that about going back to astral projection.
Yes.
The day that happened, that earthquake, I was having a dream about the earthquake happening. I ran upstairs to alert everyone, and no one was home. Then about 2 minutes later, I wake because my bed is shaking.
Wow.
I run upstairs, and no one's
one's
home. And it was a crazy experience. I've
That's
only had
crazy.
like 2 real experiences like that. And I mean, at first I thought a plane was like falling out of the sky and was just passing right over the house just because of the sound it like kind of made throughout the house. But yeah, that was a crazy moment. And then one other time, it was kind of like you described it, where you're not really able to move until you make that mental connection. It's almost like a lucid dream where you can kind of get yourself up. And kind of some experience, except I was able to look back, saw myself laying down, went upstairs, saw that it was snowing outside, opened the door, and saw a red Chevy drive by. And then a couple seconds later, snapped back into myself, walked upstairs, it was snowing, saw a red Chevy drive by.
It's so great.
Which is so weird. Like,
Yeah.
one moment was just minimal and whatever, but the other one was seeing this catastrophic event occur, and it's like, what? I kept trying to remember like the state of mind I was in before I went to bed and like when I woke up, if there was a correlation there. But we'll have to have a whole nother episode just based off that.
Because that, it's interesting. I've very rarely run into anyone else that has had an experience as close to one that I had, which is that when I was in high school, I was walking down the senior hall, which as a not senior, that was always a dangerous proposition. I was walking down the senior hall, and I was by myself, and I had this felt like a deja vu, where these 3 guys came around the corner at the end of the hall, walked toward me, made some snide comment. I made a snide comment back, and one of them punched me in the mouth. Right? But I mean, there was nobody there. It was just this kind of thing, right? And then I took like another 10, 15 steps, and those 3 guys came around the corner, and I went, if I don't say the thing, right? I tried to change it. I got punched in the mouth anyway, but it was very bizarre because it felt literally like a glitch in the Matrix. Like it was like a deja vu that hadn't happened yet. Right?
Yeah.
But it was very tactile premonition, and that's almost exactly what you're talking about with the Chevy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I remember I guess so deja vu then is like seeing something you're like, oh, I feel like I've been here before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've had what you've had. I've had those moments where it's like a premonition type of thing. Where I remember I was shoveling snow wintertime. I know, funny enough.
There we go.
With a red shovel. Okay.
A red truck drives. I'm just kidding. No. I'm shoveling snow, and I remember like after I finished, and I was probably in high school or something like that. I looked at it, and I'm like, and I remember thinking like, oh, okay, I think I did a pretty good job. And I saw like in my mind, I'm like, I saw my stepdad came out of the blue, and he's just like, oh my gosh, like you did a great job, that type of thing. And I'm like, huh. And then I turn and I look, and all of a sudden he comes out, and the whole scene plays out the exact way I saw it. I'm like, what was that? That was a little weird.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I've had something. I
That's
can't remember exactly what it was, but
interesting.
I've had something similar.
Yeah.
From a sleeping state or
Well, no,
a,
just something
awake
happening
state?
before. Like I think in a dream, like I dreamt of something, and then like a day or 2 later, like that thing happened.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what it was, but I
That's
know
so
I've had something
crazy.
like that.
Crazy.
Wait a minute.
Wait, I saw this happen.
Yeah, this was like
It was in the Google Calendar.
actually. Should we
Go ahead.
reset or I mean? sounds like
well,
we're-
we're pretty much at the end of it,
Should
so
we do
we
fact
can
or
definitely.
We
Oh yeah, we did. Actually, we probably.
This is how we end our little
yeah,
thing.
we like to do a little fact and fiction thing.
Okay. I just heard a ringy noise.
That was my.
That was
phone.
the timer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
I like ringy noise.
Yeah, I
I'm
was
just
like.
kidding.
I have a
That one
tumor?
might have cut out. It's alright. We got this.
So, fact or fiction? The first photo of a UFO was taken in 1883 in Mexico.
18. Did they even have the camera in 18?
Yeah, they did.
They
Because they have
Camera square was.
they had photographs in 1863 of Gettysburg. So.
Mhm.
Okay.
But this was the first one of an actual UFO.
I would have said fiction if I didn't see that.
I would not be surprised if it was true, because I know that there have been reports, document reports. There was one in Texas where something crashed into a windmill and they actually recovered a body and buried the body, and that was like 1889 or
19th
something.
Century still.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I think that is
Yeah,
true.
I think that's a fact.
He goes, "You're all full of crap."
I made that. No, it's a fact.
Where is it? Let's see it. Prove it.
It's
Yep.
on his phone. He
It's
typed
on my
it up.
phone.
Yeah.
We'll
He goes,
post a photo of it up here.
Let me open Photoshop.
Yeah.
Um,
But no, I'm
That
stoked
one
that
did cut out though. By the
I'm
way.
stoked we could do that today though.
Yeah.
This has been awesome, and it'll be fun to do the next session. Maybe have some questions like we were talking about.
well, and
Do you have any shout outs or plugs you want to
Yeah. What are you guys up to?
check out? Their new film,
Alien Country.
Alien Country.
Alien Country.
And you
of
can-
course.
eventually.
Eventually.
You can catch them on social media. What are your tags?
It's just I'm not on Facebook anymore.
That's
I deactivated my Facebook account because I was done.
Yeah.
But I'm still on Instagram, and that's a place to go look. And it's just my name,
Okay.
my full first and last name, HraefnWulfson, as one word.
We'll put it up.
Perfect.
And where am I? That's about it.
Perfect.
So, and well, if you want to, never mind.
Yeah, me, Facebook and Instagram, Charan Prabhakar on Facebook and Instagram. I think my handle is Charanarama at charanarama.com because
Okay.
That's
my
funny.
well, the thing is like my first name is Rama Charan. I'm like Charanarama. Sounds right.
Sharon.
Yeah.
I know we were all having that talk earlier too. We're like, it's Sharon or Charon? Because
No one knows.
I
Including
started
myself.
calling you Charon when we first
Yeah.
had very first met, and then once I heard Landon and
Oh,
like
sure,
Brian,
yeah, it's
they were
Sharon.
like Sharon, and I was like, wait. So I started mumbling your name because I didn't want to offend
Kind
you,
of
and
a
I didn't
Mexican
want to
Well,
ask you. So I was like, hey,
Here's-
Sharon.
Here's my favorite part about it. I go by Charan,
Yeah.
but I love to see how it evolves. So I never correct people when they're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just like I just don't
Yeah.
don't want to. So I've got good friends from a long time ago that still call me Charan, and I'm not gonna correct them. I'm like, you know what? It's great.
But it's
That's
sorry.
how I
What
wrote
was
my
the
name.
first part? Rama.
Rama Charan.
Rama Charan?
Rama Charan Prabhakar.
I'm changing your name to that in my phone.
You
Which is
should.
interesting because
Come
what I know about Hindi, but just what I've heard, is it's Ramacharan, or would it be Ramacharan?
It,
Oh,
it really would be pronounced Ramacharan.
Ramacharan. Okay.
Ramacharan
Ramacharan.
Prabhakar. But I'm
But-
like, you know what? We're already having enough fun with it as it is. So I'll just leave it as it is.
Really cool.
Yeah.
It's like I knew a kid growing up who was born. His born name was Rama,
Oh, okay.
and then later it changed to Devanga,
Okay.
and then I think he went back to Rama.
Yeah. Well, it's just funny. Like
Hippies.
Yeah.
I was on a show that's coming. My episode is coming out this weekend, but the director of it made a shout out to me, and he was like, "Hey, how do you say your name the Indian way?" Oh yeah, And I'm like, I don't know, like Charan. He's like, okay. So in the shout out, he's like, oh, so my good friend Charan, and I'm like, wow, he
Really?
went for it. Yeah, he went for it. I'm like, all right, good.
Some emphasis on the end there.
Yeah, he like, hey, my good friend Charan, and I'm like, sweet. But really, I go by Charan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Simple.
I actually got into a fight about your name with someone
Good.
who they said that your name was Sharon,
Yeah.
and I said I doubt his name is Sharon.
That's
It's-
like
it's-
what everyone around calls him, especially on
Well,
the
that's
sets
what white
we've been on.
people
They're
say.
like
Yeah,
Sharon, and I look at them and I'm like, and I look at you to see your reaction.
I'm
But
like,
like you said, you don't
I
correct
just
people.
don't,
So
I
I'm
don't
like,
correct people. I don't, because it's
Go with
just because the thing is, it's just fun to see where it goes.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Charan.
They're
Charan.
going to say Sharon. No, my name is Pauline, but you
Yeah.
can call me Sharon.
Yeah.
it's been wrong the whole time.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
That's
well,
okay.
cool.
That's okay because of the spelling of my name. Oh boy.
Oh, yeah.
I get it all
yeah.
over the place. I
Hraefn.
love it when people try to pronounce it the real Anglo-Saxon, the Old English. They'll go Hraefn. Hraefn. I have people now that still go Hraefn. I'm going. You can just say Raven, all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you.
Thanks for coming by.
Yep.
Really appreciate it. That was
Absolutely.
a great time.
Yep.
And like I said, I'm happy to come back and talk more.
Definitely.
anytime.
Yeah.
It's fun.
We'll have you both back on.
Awesome. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yep.